Good morning, classmates. Good morning, Sir PP2. We're Group 5 and we are here in our virtual stage to tackle about the accomplishment of import data entry for actual customs valuation. So this topic is related to SIM 016-2010, the rules and regulations to implement Customs Administrative Number 4, 2004, more particularly on duty-able value. I am Melanie Calago. For the first report on our topic, and the rest of my group mates will be the continuation of our topic. So let's start. For objectives, first, to effectively implement CAL for 2004, including its objectives by incorporating in the customs regulations the principles, explanatory note, and such are the text relevant to the duty-able value under the World Trade Organization Valuation Agreement. Second, to make sure that duties and taxes are properly collected. Third, to make the customs rules and regulations compliant with the WVE to guide concerned parties in the correct application of the principles and standards in the determination of duty-able value under CAL 4 2004. And 5 is to promote trade facilitation through the adoption of the principles and standards customs valuation under the WVE. Principles and standards in the determination of the duty-able value principles. It is imperative that the rules for the application of the provision of the WVE be elaborated in order to provide greater uniformity and certainty in its implementation. There is a need for a fair, uniform, and neutral system for the valuation of goods for customs purposes that precludes the use of arbitrary or fictitious duty-able value. The basis for valuation of goods for customs purposes should, to the greatest extent possible, the transaction value of the goods being valued. The debitable value should be based on simple and equitable criteria consistent with commercial practices, and that valuation procedures should be a general application without deduction between source of supply, and valuation procedures should not be used to combat dumping. For standards, the method of valuation are set out in a sequential order of application. Primary method for customs valuation is the transaction value, and imported goods are to be valued in accordance with the provision of this method whenever the conditions prescribed for its use are fulfilled. Where the duty-able value cannot be determined under the transaction value method, it is to be determined by proceeding sequentially through the succeeding methods to the first such method under which the duty-able value can be determined. Use of generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP. It is refers to the recognized consensus or substantial authoritative support within a country at a particular time as to which economic resources and obligations should be recorded as assets, and liabilities, which changes in assets, and the liabilities should be recorded. Bureau of Customs shall utilize information prepared in a manner consistent within with the generally accepted accounting principles in the country which is appropriate for the valuation method in question. On the other hand, the determination of usual profit and general expenses under the provisions of Method 5 would be carried out utilizing information prepared in a manner consistent with the generally accepted accounting principles of the country of production. Rules on customs valuation and general provisions. The primary method in determining the dutiable value of imported goods shall be the method 1, the transaction value, whenever the conditions prescribed for its use are fulfilled. If the dutiable value cannot be determined with the use of method 1, the following valuation methods shall be applied in sequential order. And method 2, the transaction value of identical goods. And method 3, the transaction value of similar goods. And method 4, deductive value. Method 5, computed value. And method 6, fallback value. Method 1, the transaction value, price actually paid or payable. The dutiable value of imported goods shall be the transaction value. The price actually paid or payable is the total payment made or to be made by the buyer Two are for the benefit of the seller for imported goods. So in concepts of sale and sell for report, the transaction value of the imported goods is based on the price actually paid or payable for those goods when sold. The WBE itself provides no definition of a sale. WC Advisory Opinion 1.2 provides guidance in this matter by elaborating on the concept of sale as it appears in the WBE. So it states that a sale may be described as follows: a commercial operation which involves a buyer and a seller. The buyer agrees to obtain certain goods. An agreement to exchange the ownership of the goods at the time for a price or other consideration. A compensation occurs as the transfer for ownership and acquisition for those goods, and both parties acknowledge that the transaction constitutes a commercial operation. In no sale, goods that might be considered not to be subject to a sale would include, among others, the following: pre-consignment like gifts, samples, and promotional items; goods imported on consignment; goods imported intermediaries who do not purchase the goods and wholesale them after importation; goods imported by branch officers which are not separate legal entities; goods imported under a hire or leasing contract; and the goods supplied on loan which remain the property of the sender. Sale for report: only transactions involving an actual international transfer of goods may be used in valuing merchandise under the transaction value method. So for export in a series of sales, the price actually paid or payable the imported of goods when sold for export to the Philippines is the price paid in the sale occurring prior to the introduction. For conditions under method 1, so there must be no restrictions as the disposition or use of the goods by the buyer other than restriction which are imposed or required by Philippines authorities. Limit the geographical area in which the goods may be resold and do not substantially affect the value of the goods. The sale or price must be the subject to some conditions or consideration for which a value cannot be determined with respect to the goods being valued. So, if the sale or price is subject to some conditions or consideration for which a value cannot be determined with respect to the goods being valued, the transaction value shall not be acceptable. For customs purposes, some examples of this include: the seller establishes the price of the imported goods on condition that the buyer will also buy other goods in a specified quantity.
Going to tackle about the acceptance of method 1 in related sale, significance of these values, close approximation of adjustments,
acceptance of method 1 related sale. If the buyer and seller are related, the use of the transaction value method is acceptable if either of the two following circumstances is present.
Collector of customs action when there is ground that relationship has influenced the price. In the light of information provided by the importer or otherwise, the collector of customs has ground for considering that the relationship influenced the price. He shall communicate the ground to the importer, and the importer shall be given a reasonable opportunity to respond. If the importer so requests, the communication of the ground shall be in writing.
Significance of test values. Test values
provide an opportunity for the importer to demonstrate that the transaction value closely approximates to a task value previously accepted by the collector of customs and is thereof acceptable under the provisions of Method 1. Close approximation of values. A number of factors must be taken into consideration in determining whether one value closely approximates to another value. These factors include the nature of the imported goods, the nature of the industry itself, the season in which the goods are imported, and whether the difference in values is commercially significant. Since these factors may vary from case to case, it would be impossible to apply a uniform standard such as a fixed percentage in each case. Adjustments. In determining the adjustable value under the provisions of Method 1, the following adjustments shall be added to the price actually paid or payable for the imported goods being valued to the extent that they are incurred by the buyer, provided there is objective and quantifiable data to form the basis of the adjustment, and if such value has not been included in the price actually paid or payable. First is the commission and brokerage fees. Second is the cost of containers which are treated as being one for customs purposes with the goods in question. Cost of packing, whether for labor or material. As this is defined as the value appointed as appropriate of certain goods and services supplied directly or indirectly by the buyer free of charge or at reduced cost for use in connection with the production and sale for export of the imported goods to the extent that such value has not been incorporated in the price actually paid or payable. The goods and services are materials, components, parts, and similar items incorporated in the imported goods, tools, dies, molds, and similar items used in the production of the imported goods, materials consumed in the engineering, development, artwork, design work, and plans and sketches undertaken elsewhere than in the Philippines and necessary for
royalties and license fees related to the goods being valued that the buyer must pay, either directly or indirectly, as a condition of sale of goods being valued, to the extent that such royalties and fees are not included in the price actually paid or payable. The royalties and license fees may include, among other things, payment in respect to patents, trademarks, and copyrights. However, the charges for the right to reproduce the imported goods in the Philippines shall not be added to the price actually paid or payable for the imported goods in the determining the dutiable value. The value of any part of the proceeds of any subsequent resale, disposal, or use of the imported goods that accrues directly or indirectly to the seller. An example of this element is that when the contract of sale between buyer and seller states that a certain percentage of the sale proceeds of an imported article is remitted to the seller. The cost of transport of the imported goods to the port of entry in the Philippines, loading, unloading, and handling charges associated with the transport of the imported goods to the port of entry in the Philippines. The cost of transportation would include those costs for physically moving the goods to the port of entry in the Philippines. This cost could include such charges as trucking, inland freight, rail freight, ocean freight, air freight, and barge or light airage and postal cost. Charges for loading, unloading, and handling could be attributed to a number of different activities. Loading and unloading would include, in part, the movement of goods onto or from any conveyance. Handling would include any number of activities surrounding the physical movement of the goods, such as preparation of materials. The cost of insurance. For purposes of the determination of insurance as component of dutiable value, reference is to be made to the provisions of CMO number 22/2007, dated 6 September 2007. The word insurance under this section means those charges for insurance for the goods during transportation, loading, unloading, and handling. WCO Advisory Opinion 13.1 states that the word insurance should be interpreted as referring solely to insurance costs incurred for the goods during the transport of the imported goods to the port or place of the importation. Post-importation charges or cost. The dutiable value must not include the following charges or costs if they are distinguished from the price actually paid or payable for the goods, like charges for construction, erection, assembly, maintenance, or technical assistance undertaken after importation on imported goods such as industrial plant, machinery, or equipment. Also, costs of transport after importation, and duties, taxes, and other charges paid for the imported goods. All additions to the price actually paid or payable shall be made only on the basis of objective and quantifiable data. Where objective and quantifiable data do not exist with regard to the additions required to be made under the provisions of Section 328, the transaction value cannot be determined under the provisions of Method 1. As an illustration of this, a royalty is paid on the basis of the price in a sale in the importing country of a litre of a particular product that was imported by the kilogram and made up into the solution after importation. If the royalty is based partially on the imported goods and partially on the other factors which have nothing to do with the imported goods. However, if the amount in this royalty is based only on the imported goods and can be readily quantified, an addition to the price actually paid or payable can be made. And no addition shall be made to the price actually paid or payable in determining the dutiable value except as provided in Section 328. So the next is the Method 2, which is the transaction value of identical goods. If the dutiable value of imported goods cannot be determined with the use of Method 1, the dutiable value shall be determined under Method 2, or the transaction value of identical goods sold for export to the Philippines and exported at or about the same time as the goods being valued. In applying this method, the transaction value of identical goods in a sale at the same commercial level and in substantially the same quantity as their goods being valued shall be used to determine the dutiable value, where no such sale is found. The transaction value of identical goods sold at a different commercial level and or in different quantities, adjusted to take account of differences attributable to commercial level and or to quantity, shall be used, provided that such adjustment can be made on the basis of demonstrated evidence which clearly establish the reason and accuracy of the adjustment, whether the adjustment leads to an increase or a decrease in the value. Next is Method 3, which is the transaction value of similar goods. If the dutiable value of imported goods cannot be determined under the preceding methods, the dutiable value shall be the transaction value of similar goods sold for export to the Philippines and exported at or about the same time as the goods being valued. In applying this method, the transaction value of similar goods in a sale at the same commercial level and substantially the same quantity as the goods being valued shall be used to determine the dutiable value where no such sale is found. The transaction value of similar goods sold at a different commercial level and or in different quantities, adjusted to take account of difference attributable to commercial level and or to quantity, shall be used, provided that such adjustment can be made on the basis of demonstrated evidence which clearly establishes the reasonable and accuracy of the adjustment, whether the adjustment leads to an increase or decrease in the value. So the definition of similar goods excludes imported goods for which engineering, development, artwork, design work, and plans, sketches is undertaken in the Philippines and is provided by the buyer to the producer of the goods free of charge or at a reduced cost.
If there are no sales of identical or similar imported goods in the condition as imported that met at all above requirements, the importer may choose to use sales in imported goods being valued after further processing, where the method in section 3.11 is use of deduction made for the value added by the further processing small based on objective and quantifiable data. That's all.
Method 5. The computed value. Under this method, the dutiable value is determined on the basis of the cost of production of the goods being valued, plus an amount for profit and general expenses, usually reflected in sales from the country of exportation to the Philippines of goods of the same class or kind. So the dutiable value may be calculated as follows. So it determines the aggregate of the relevant costs, charges, and expenses, or the value of first is material add amount for profit and general expenses equal to that usually reflected in sales of goods of the same class. As a general rule, the dutiable value is determined under this method on the basis of information readily available in the country of importation. So in order to determine a computed value, however, it may be necessary to examine the cost of producing the goods being valued and information other than that supplied by or on behalf of the producer is used for purposes of determining the computed value, and the collector of customs shall inform the importer, if the latter so requests, of the source of such information and the data used and the calculations based upon such data, subject to the collector of customs shall not require or compel any person not residing in the Philippines to produce for examination or to allow access to any account or other record for the purposes of determining a computed value. And Method 6. The fallback value. When the dutiable value cannot be determined under any of the previous method of valuation, it shall be determined by using other reasonable means consistent with the principles and general provisions of GATT 1994, the WVA, and on the basis of data available in the Philippines. If the importer so requests, he shall be informed in writing of the dutiable value determined under Method 6 and the method used to determine such value. And no dutiable value shall be determined under Method 6 on the basis of dutiable values determined under the provisions of Method 6 should be the greatest extent possible and to be based on previously determined dutiable values. The methods of valuation to be employed under Method 6 should be those laid down in the Method 1 through Method 5, but a reasonable flexibility in the application of such methods would be in conformity with the aims and provisions of Method 6. Some examples of reasonable flexibility are identical goods, similar goods, and deductive method. And these are the cases where the collector of customs has reasons to doubt the truth or accuracy of the declared value. First is published or established dutiable value or any other value reference from whatever a source cannot be used as a substitute value for customs valuation. Second, when an import declaration has been presented and where the collector of customs has reason to doubt the truth or accuracy of the particular or of documents produced in support of this declaration. Third, if after receiving further information or in the absence of a response from the importer, the collector of customs still has reasonable doubts about the truth or accuracy of the declared values, then it is deemed that the dutiable value of the imported goods cannot be determined under Method 1. And fourth, before taking a final decision, the collector of customs shall communicate to the importer in writing, if requested, the grounds for doubting the truth or accuracy of the particular or documents produced, and then importer shall be given a reasonable opportunity to respond. And when a final decision is made, the collector of customs shall communicate to the importer in writing his decision and the ground in support. Lastly, The above procedure is without prejudice to the importer's right to secure tentative release under sufficient guarantee and right to appeal pursuant to customs. So, in separability clause, the provisions of this order are hereby ordered separable, and in case any provision hereof is declared invalid, the other remaining provisions which are not affected shall remain in full force and effect, and all customs memorandum orders, memoranda, or parts thereof which are inconsistent with this order are hereby deemed superseded, amended, or modified accordingly, and this order shall take effect immediately. Thank you.